Okay, good evening, everyone. I hope you're all having a great Sunday night. I'm gonna go ahead and check my audio real quick. Think it should be fine. Yep, here it is. So, I'm actually gonna have. I actually have a guest that's gonna be joining us in a few minutes here. Brandon Spencer. But I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what inspired this stream. Oh, hi, Mark Schumann. How are you doing? Um, so the last couple of years, I have been kind of going through a little bit of a back and forth when it comes to this channel. I never knew what exactly to do with it, and I just never really. Every time I would just make a video only focusing on all the conspiracies going on and all that and yelling about COVID or whatever I was talking about at the time. It just, I figured it was important, but it just never, it didn't feel entirely right to me. I'm glad you're doing okay, Mark, and hello, M10. How are you? Yeah, so it never really, no matter how many times I made videos and how positive the reception was, I would always just feel like there was something missing and I never had enough direction with my channel to feel like I had any reason to stay consistent with it because it just felt like I was just kind of adding to the scream and stay and saying what everyone else is screaming. Oh, Brandon's here. Let me let him in. Hi, Brandon.
Howdy, howdy. How is it going? I thought I had my camera turned off for a sec. I'll show it later. What's going on, Hills? Thank you for having me.
No problem. I was just kind of going through the whole thing of feeling, the whole conspiracy channel issue of kind of screaming into the void, but also screaming all the same things that everyone else is screaming about and just not feeling quite right about it.
Yes, I can understand where you are coming from because I was in that same place about 8 years ago and I decided, well, I knew that there was something deeper as far as an intelligence, as far as a purpose, as far as a meaning. So I decided to, open up my mind to the doors of consciousness and shadow work, the teachings of how natural law. And sadly, that's where most people don't want to go. They want to stay in the realm of the effects. They don't really want to get to the causal factors of why is it that we are losing our rights and freedom? Why is it that we are enslaved? Why is it that these things are going on? Why is it that collectivism is spreading? Why is it that this cancer of mind control and slavery and moral relativism and solipsism, egoism, atheism is infested in people's minds? And that's what I hope to kind of share with people is causality. You know, why is it that these things are going on?
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. Except for me, getting here was a little bit different because like I've been researching like conspiracy stuff for a very very long time, and one of the things that I realized kind of gradually over the years is that here I was, talking about all these things, and I've like purged my channel a couple of times, so I don't think a lot of people have seen my old videos. but the ones that I made in like the 2010s were coming from a very angry place, a very like kind of like I was, reading Agenda 2030 and just angry about it. And I ended up taking a lot of that stuff down because I didn't think it was productive at all. And then I just started thinking, like, more and more in like recent years, like the older I've gotten, the more that I kept coming back to the idea of like, why am I getting on this YouTube channel and telling people all this stuff when I'm not even really completely facing my own demons? It's like I have to deal with my own demons before I could come on here on any consistent basis and have anything to offer to other
Right, right.
people other than just angrily screaming into the void because I see all this chaos around me. So it's like a realization that I had a couple times over the years that I just was sitting, but I would sit here and I'd be like, "Oh my god," but I have to say something, and it just never, like, I would just keep kind of having a back and forth with myself. I'm like, okay, there has to be something I could say other than lockdowns are bad, okay? And if
Right.
you and if you do the lockdowns, you're bad. Like, there's got to be, or I don't know, gun control or this shooting or that shooting or whatever, all the other things that I had videos about. And it just, like, I don't know, I couldn't live with myself knowing that if I posted a video and it didn't add any like positivity to anything, like anything that somebody could actually look deeper at, then it wasn't worth it and I might as well just not.
Yes, I totally understand what you are getting at. And before I get into some points and some caveats, I want to bring this awareness to most people. What I say may be different than what most people say. So let's not fall into any form of logical fallacies and make the fallacy an appeal to our emotions. When people hear things that may make them feel uncomfortable or upsetting, they will deny what they are hearing, and they don't really go through the proper steps to discern if what they are hearing is actually true. And then also too, people will appeal to their belief systems. So based on their conditioning, based on their indoctrination, and based on what they believe, they may hear some information that goes against what they believe, and they will automatically deny it. So I'm asking people to please try not to make those fallacies. Try to suspend your beliefs and your emotions, and just take the information that I'm going to talk about, that me and Hale are going to talk about. Because one of the things that people are still stuck in is the exoteric form of knowledge. And the word exoteric comes from the Greek word exoterikos, and that's just the outer shell. The people who want to focus on just the conspiracies, they want to just stay talking about, the effects or what's happening in the real world. But there is another essential ingredient that people are forgetting, and it is the core. That is the esoteric. That is the hitting. That is the core, the innermost part where all the power is. That is where the initiation lies. And the word esoteric comes from the Greek word esoterikos, and that is where the secret chamber lies. And that's where we have to go in our knowledge, is we have to keep going deeper and deeper on that constant persistence of truth, that constant persistence of going within ourselves, that constant journey within. And as long as we stay ignorant of this esoteric knowledge, this knowledge of self, then we will sadly stay enslaved and ultimately face extinction. So, one of the main things that my work focuses on is the knowledge of objective morality. And I know this is not very favorable in the so called freedom and truth community. They think that they can just get to a state of freedom without understanding what is right and wrong in the form of objective behavior. Too many people still subscribe to moral relativism. Too many people think that right and wrong is based on culture, is based on, what man says, is based on what government says, are based on the whims of how they feel and what they believe. This is the best way to bring down any society. Because if you cannot come to a fundamental understanding of objective right and wrong in the form of behavior and actions, then how can we learn to ever come to live with our neighbors? You can't. You will create a form of chaos that would be so indestructible that with the immutable laws that govern, her creation, those laws will give us exactly what we put out. So if we have billions of people who are going around thinking that they are the arbiters of right and wrong, what kind of world are we going to create? What kind of society are we going to live in? What kind of society are we going to construct for our kids? Sadly, it is the same society that we have now. And this society has been constructed with our own hands. You see, we are the causers of everything that is going on. We have free will. We have the free will choice to use discernment. We have the free will choice to decide for ourselves. But based on what we choose on our free will action, that's going to manifest a form of consequence, a form of effects into the objective physical world. So if our behaviors are moral, they are right, they are true, they adhere to natural law, they adhere to God's law, they adhere to the law of karma, they adhere to the law of cause and effect, then we will reap the benefits of those actions. Just as though the antithesis, if we are going around stealing, if we are going around murdering, if we are going around raping, if we are going around lying, if we are going around cheating, if we are going around using means of deceit and defrauding people, we are going to get those same results back, not just on an individual basis, but in a collective basis too. And that's what people seem to have forgotten. They have forgotten the golden rule. They have forgotten the ancient teachings of Christ. And yet, many people will say that they are good moral people when yet their actions betray their thoughts and how they feel. And that's a form of hypocrisy. That's a form of internal contradiction. That is a form of an internal schism. And that is the exact place that the slave masters want you to be in because you're going left, right, you're going up, down. There is no internal harmony. There is no internal balance. There is no internal knowing. There is no integrity. You are fragmented. And therefore, as long as you are fragmented in your thinking, your actions will always betray what you think. So,
Yeah,
and
I've noticed that in real time with a lot of things. For example, this is a very surface level example, but it's an example that we can all see. You know, with the left right paradigm, you have like there's there if you look at like their belief system, there's always like two contradictory like beliefs, like for example being anti-cop and anti-gun, like being anti like not being a fan of police but at the same time wanting the government to control guns. And it's just like one example of many things in our society that kind of comes from like people not looking inside and not like really not being able to have like consistent thinking on things, like people that are just stuck in like so much cognitive dissonance that they can hold two completely different contradictory beliefs at the same time.
yes, and that is a mental illness.
There's so much of it, and I think it's also partially because people I think, like, one of the things that has helped us manifest that in our lives is, um, the level the intergenerational, like, manipulation that exists. Like, if you look at, like, what we have in our microcosm every day, what we bring into our microcosm is going to add into the macrocosm. So a lot of people will see some similarities between what they have going on in their own lives and what's going on all around them. Like with the gaslighting, there's a lot of, manipulative gaslighting people that we run into in our own lives that many people will point to and say, "Well, that sounds exactly like, hey, look, that's what the media is doing." So like what we have in our individual lives, if we look hard enough and if we search, we see that it also exists in our lives around us. So like you were saying,
Correct.
we kind of do manifest our reality, but we have so many people that are so unwilling to look at themselves that they let themselves regress back into like a childlike state where they're like, I don't care about I don't care what's going on around me. I just want mommy and daddy to tell me what's right now. And mommy and daddy become like mommy and daddy right n- right now for a lot of adults are like the media and the government and the whoever. They just kind of, whenever they see that stuff, they regress back into a childlike state because they have never done the work to grow up and reparent themselves after not really being parented by parents.
Right. You are 100% correct on that because what do we call a being as far as the human being, one who does not want to be responsible for themselves? We call them a child. So most people may have grown up physically, but psychologically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, they are an infant. And I want to kind of get back to right and wrong real quick because people don't understand that right and wrong exists in nature. Right and wrong are objective. They are very much objective. Even if human beings did not exist, right and wrong would still be real. So we aren't the arbiters of right and wrong. If you want to say it's created by God, I'm 100% fine with that. Yeah, I just simply say it's created by law. It's ingrained in the fabric of creation. Cause and effect is ingrained in the fabric of creation. You cannot do anything in this world without having an effect. And every effect had a cause that came beforehand. So when it comes to right and wrong, our rights are objective. We all share the same amount of rights. It doesn't matter if you are male, female, man, woman, or whatever you identify as. It doesn't matter where you were born. It doesn't matter what your title is. It doesn't matter how much money you have. All of that are just labels and illusions to get people to feel as though they're separate and to get people to not understand that we all have the same amount of rights. That's why we call it a right, RIGHT, because a right was something that was always associated with the sun, because the sun was always a symbol of God, the spiritual integrity, knowledge. So anything that was upright that pointed toward the sun was considered to be right, RIGHT. So then, therefore, that's where we get the word from. Right was something that was just. In the Latin form, it was called jus. Right was just. Right was the justice. If you are familiar with the whole symbols and what rights were, they was always equated to, or the symbols was always equated with Lady Liberty, who had her scales of justice, because natural law is the balancing factor, because there will become a time when we all will be judged by the law or by creation or by God. So in our actions, that's how we construct reality. That's how we build things with our hands. That's why certain consequences are prevalent for us than with the animal kingdom, because our brain capacity, our brain structure, our neocortex is very complex. It is far more advanced than any other creature in the animal world. We can understand morality. We can come to know ourselves. We can use problem solving to, help to reason. We can use discernment. We can become aware of things. We can use mapping to kind of build a map of ourselves and our environment. So then, therefore, certain laws in manifestation, certain laws in nature apply to us, because with that knowledge comes responsibility. With knowledge comes responsibility. And that's what people are forgetting. And that's what people don't want to grasp, is they think that they can just exist. and not be responsible. They think that they can just exist and not be responsible for their behavior. And that is the greatest way for creation to turn its back on you, the greatest way for God to turn his back on you, because you are denying one of the greatest gifts ever given to you, free will and your ability to use discernment. And that's why
Yeah,
people lack a conscience.
that's like Pl- plus, I do feel that a lot of times by the time people start losing track of their conscience, because it doesn't happen overnight. It starts with one justification, then the next, like it's one justification for one small thing, and then one, oh yeah, you know what? I justified that small thing, and now like it's like it doesn't happen overnight. Just abandoning principles, it like people and then people get themselves stuck in this loop once they abandon their conscience and they abandon
Yep.
their sense of right and wrong that we all have. And then when they're stuck in this loop, they can't look at themselves, so they start looking at everyone else, and it's like, well, it's not my fault I don't have this and this and that. It's their fault. It's not my fault I got fired from my job for stealing money. It's his fault for not paying me enough. It's like these things that people do. They just start they and then they start when you can't look at yourself long enough, you start projecting all of those things that you see in yourself onto everyone else because you can't look in the mirror and face yourself. We all have we all have a shadow self. The Bible calls it the flesh. Other people call it the shadow self. For like in layman's terms, it's just our bad thoughts and desires and things that we don't necessarily want to deal with. So
Right.
when we don't acknowledge the side of ourselves that sits in the shadow and we don't put light on it, then we're going to act that out. If we're not constantly doing soul searching, constantly looking at our motives and how we're doing things and how we're carrying ourselves, and if it really aligns with our principles, then we can easily fall into that loop, just like those that are in that loop all around us. And unfortunately, most people are just stuck in that loop of I don't of oh, I'm losing things and it's everyone else's fault. It's the government's fault. It's corporations' fault. It's whatever, because they're not doing anything with the tools that we were given.
Yes, and I'm glad that you brought up the word justification because the etymology of that word, it's made up of two words. You have just, which was yes, which was right, and then vacation, which was the old Latin word facere, which means to create. So you combine the two, it means to create a right. And that's the one thing that man cannot do is man cannot create rights because rights are not created by man. They are created by nature, by God, by law, by creation. So then therefore when we try to justify our behaviors, what we are actually doing is turning our back on true creation, because we are saying, hey, I am God, I can create what is moral, I can create what is right. And that's one of the two main things that man cannot do. And of course the other is man cannot control a fellow man because that's slavery. And sadly, that is the conditions of today. Because we have bought into the ideology of moral relativism, people think that they can, create what is right in behavior. Then we are creating a prison. We are literally creating, well, I shouldn't say creating, we have created a hell, a hell prison. Earth is one big slave colony if people haven't figured it out, because people aren't taking personal responsibility. People are ignoring their conscience. People are not taking personal accountability, and then also they are not holding others to that same standard. And that's why the importance of right and wrong is the essential glue for human beings to function in physical reality. Because if you do not have that core essential ingredient, this is the most essential ingredient for us to have, is the understanding of right and wrong. We will always fall victim to entropy. we will create a chaos. We will create an enslaved society. And that's why all the slave masters have always kept their serfs in ignorance. They didn't teach them how, to read, didn't teach them how to count money, didn't teach them how to pretty much defend themselves. Because when you keep a populace in ignorance, they are so much more easier to control. But one of the biggest ways is to keep them in ignorance of right and wrong. Then, therefore, some of the population will actually think that a smaller group of people in authority have certain rights that you and I don't have. It's just like if you and I went out and stole something, we would go to jail. But yet, people in authority steal from us every day and they get away with it. If you and I went out and did what a lot of order followers do, steal property, pull people over, use violence, you and I would be thrown in a cage. Yet they do it
And
on
we
a
would
daily
probably
basis.
get and we would probably get the violence from the very order followers that we were simply emulating.
Correct.
And this is like this is something I've been thinking about a lot too. It's like when you when I'm dealing with somebody now, I listen very, very carefully to their justifications of like how they like you know objective there is an objective morality, but when you're dealing with somebody who has a subjective quote unquote morality, it's very important, I think, to really talk to them and try to like sort of show them where they're at with morality. Like recently I have a friend who is pretty programmed, and he was recently telling me that, well, he was trying to make the argument to me that somebody uh it, Peter Files were not as wrong. Like it was like we were talking about, I think one of the first presidents or something that happened to be one of those types of people, and I said, and he asked me if he asked me for some reason he asked me if I would feel if I feel the same way about this person as I do about modern ones, even though it was okay at that time. And I'm like, yes, I would. Just because l- legally it was not considered wrong, that doesn't mean it's not morally wrong. I keep trying to tell that there are a lot of people that I've been talking to lately that seem to, you know, what's the word? Conflate legality with morality, which is
Right.
something I find incredibly disturbing
Yep.
because they're kind of buying into that like slave consciousness where anything can be right or wrong based on what the government tells me. Like it's wrong to not wear a seatbelt right now, but if the government tells me tomorrow that I don't have to wear a seatbelt anymore, suddenly it's not wrong and it's okay to get thrown out of your windshield. Or drunk driving. I feel like a lot of people now only consider drunk driving wrong because it's illegal and people will get fined for it.
Right.
Like stuff like that. Yeah, so that's just something I've been running into a lot because this one particular person who's very programmed was telling me about you know, the Peter files and how it was fine at one time, so I can't be too hard on I can't judge them with my modern moral standards. And I'm like, "Okay, you want to go back to the South in like the early United States and tell me that that was right?" Like it's just it's just really weird to listen to people who get their morality from some other external source when we all have a conscience and we all have morality, like moral code for lack of a better term, imprinted on our souls at birth.
Yes. Now, mind you, I've been trying to teach people about morality, and I would say, sadly, 98% of the people who I've come across are moral relativists. And you hit the nail right on the head when you said people equate legality with morality. This gets into the belief in authority. You see, people actually think that they can right wrongs on paper and it somehow becomes right. Now, listen to what I just said because there was some word magic in there. There was a homophone in there, and I'm pretty sure people didn't even catch it. People think that they can right wrongs on paper and think that they are actually right. WRITE is the same subconsciously when it's heard as RIGHT. So it's a form of sorcery. It's a form of word magic. People think that they can right wrongs on paper. So then therefore you subscribe to it and think that they're actually right. And that's what man's law is all about. The belief in authority. They think that people in authority have certain rights that you and I don't have. So therefore, they can WRITE a wrong on paper and it becomes a right. That's mind control. That is mind control. And that's the problem is people are under mind control and people don't want to call it for what it is. It's mind control. It's not just like hardcore trauma mind control. There are a lot of ways you can control someone's mind through softcore mind control, through the government education, cult like indoctrination. And that's the thing is most people have gone through this cult like indoctrination. You know, the whole isolation, the whole herd conformity, the whole repetition, then trauma and fear. I've done videos all hell about that. That's the best way to install a cult like mentality in people. And the state is a cult, it is a death cult. And that's why people believe into it. That's why they worship it. That's why it is people's mommy and daddy because people suffer from the traumatic form of parental abandonment. It doesn't have to be physical abandonment, it can be emotionally abandonment, it can be psychological abandonment, it can be spiritual abandonment, it can be mental abandonment. And that's the thing is once that trauma is created, because the word trauma from an etymological standpoint means a wound. It means a heavy blow. It's what creates internal division. That trauma gets stored into your subconscious mind. And then therefore, if you keep burying it deeper and deeper, it becomes stored into the unconscious to where you're not even aware of it. But yet it will always try to work its way back up to the surface. But you see, the crafty social engineers know all of this. So then, therefore, they create institutions for people who project this trauma out to be ill associated with. So then, therefore, they'll go and join these institutions, these cults, because that's really what they are. Is they're cults because they all use the same cult programming. They isolate you from everyone else. They isolate you from your loved ones. They isolate you from your friends. They isolate you from real information. Then they have the herd conformity. You know, you all start dressing the same. You all start saying the same chants. You all start believing the same thing. And then they repeat these same steps over and over and over and over again. They get it programmed into your subconscious mind. And then they use trauma, fear to scare you because when you're in fear, there is no conscious mind. It's only subconscious. And therefore, the programming gets repeated over and over again. The same programming that these corporations use, the same programming that the military uses, the same programming that people in government use, the same programming that police go through, these order followers. It's everywhere. And people don't know about it.
Yeah, that's
So then,
because we live in a culture. Culture.
yep,
It's just a massive it's a massive like they're trying we've been being pushed for a very long time toward a hive mind sort of situation. They know deep down inside that humans are individuals. We are individuals. We are social creatures. We do travel in packs. Those things are true. but we are individuals. We each have our own mind, our own body, our own skills, our own thoughts, our own needs, our own goals. But they don't want that. And I'm not just talking about with the internet. This has been going on long before the internet. The internet is just the newest form of it with technology and stuff. Is we've been being pushed toward like a collective, more of a collective consciousness, where like if you talk to like 5 people about whatever event is going on right now, they're all just pretty much going to spew the same thing because all the corporations and all the people they consider mommy and daddy are also spewing the same thing too. And it's because they're trying to push us into a hive mind and away from ourselves and our individual understanding of the world. God created individuals because we were meant to work together, and God gave us the ability to kind of work as a collective because we needed to be able to work together. But now our humans want to be social and have a tribe and a pack has been weaponized so much that it's turning into a whole hive mind, and most people don't even realize it. They don't realize that they're not thinking their own thoughts anymore because they're so distracted from themselves by the hive mind programming and all the other distractions that come with society that keep us from actually being able to just sit down and quiet and think. Now we have our phones taking our attentions, we have jobs that are taking our attentions, we have like politicians that take our attention away from like whenever we're focused on the external world, we cannot focus on ourselves and what we're actually thinking about. And a practice that I have employed in my own life is when I start sort of analyzing things for whether for my channel or for my own understanding, and I feel a pang of some kind of feeling, I start to ask myself, is that did that come from me or did that come from the collective consciousness that they're attempting to force me into?
Right.
When I read words and I see all the little trigger words and I start to look at, okay, what if I were to give into the hive mind, what would that word be meant to elicit out of me?
Right. To try to get a reaction instead of a response. Because a reaction is usually an unconscious reaction. It's an animalistic reaction. It's going to come out of the R complex, which is the lowest level part of our brain. The medulla oblongata, the pons, the brain stem. Or it can also come from the limbic system, which is the emotional characteristics of our brain. So that word could trigger an emotional reaction based on, uh, um, you know, a certain belief, certain trauma. Then you also can have a response. That's where it comes from the neocortex. That's the higher part of the brain. That's where the higher functioning thought happens. That's where you can take that held that word in or that information because it comes in through your senses. It goes through the central nervous system, and then it goes up through the brain stem. It goes up through the thalamus, and then it should go to the prefrontal lobes. Hopefully, if your brain is operating right. But sadly, most people's brains aren't operating right. But if it was, then that neocortex would take the information in, and then it's going to say, is this true? It's going to go through how the proper steps, and then it's going to elicit a response back outward and push it back out in the form of action and behavior. And that's the thing, is people are just reacting. It is an animalistic form of reaction, a stimulus response form of reaction. And this comes from Ivan Pavlov's study in behaviorism. They learn how to control people's behavior by a way of controlling people's environment. You know, you can get people to react based on repetition, control their environment. Then, therefore, those means of controls will elicit an internal response, and you can program that response to react based on how you want it to be. And if you don't believe me, then just go on any form of search engine and then just look up Pavlovian training, Ivan Pavlov, and how he was able to program dogs to elicit a form of
And then
salvation.
and then people, he did the same thing with people.
Yes.
He did like what a lot of, the scientists that sort of helped construct. I was gonna say destruct. I honestly think destruct would be better. Um, the people, a lot of the people, he did what a lot of the people did back then when they were trying to figure this stuff out. He actually went to an orphanage
Yep.
and found kids that, you know, nobody would really care about the permanent damage, and he drilled holes into their cheeks and got access to their salivary glands, and he found out that we can basically be controlled the same way any other animal can.
Yep. And that was one of the early things that science and psychology got wrong is they just said like, hey, we was another form of animal when in actuality we have an animalistic component to us, but we are way much more. And then two, I mean, hell, let's be honest, that's one of the hallmarks of the satanic ideology, is that we are
Yeah,
just
just
another
put us
animal.
yeah, put
Yeah,
us down on the same level as animals. Yes, we have animalistic components and stuff, but we ourselves are not the same as animals. God put us, or whatever you yeah, God put us. He made the distinction.
right. I mean, because what animal is doing what man has done? What animal has destroyed as much as what we have done? What animal has built and created as much as what we have done? So I mean, if you think that you're just hell not an animal, hey, you got animals that are eating their own feces. You got animals who are just living in their hell libidos, hell getting heat. But sadly, people have been conditioned to operate just as another beast on the playing field. And you see too, that's where the ideology of moral relativism leads people into a animalistic, hedonistic mentality. And moral relativism also falls under the satanic mindset because you are turning upside down. You are going against the universal laws. You are going against God's law. How right and wrong are created in reality has nothing to do with man-made, creation. No man and no group of men, no woman, no group of women can change what is right and wrong in the form of behavior. It doesn't matter who you are. If you steal, if you murder, if you rape, if you transgress, if you use coercion, if you willfully use form of deceit, you are wrong. If you trespass on someone else's property, you are wrong. It doesn't matter who you are. But the satanic mindset will say, oh no, I can do that because I am the arbiter of law. I am God. I can make what is right and wrong. So I can go out and murder. I can go out and start wars. I can tax people and steal their money from their hard labor. And then you got people who support that, who give energy to that. And that's why our species is heading down a dangerous path. It's because people are in such ignorance. They'll understand exactly what I'm saying, and then they'll still support the same thing that is enslaving them. They
Yeah,
will
I've
still
I've
support the same
sorry.
thing.
I've
No,
I've
you can go.
definitely I've definitely noticed that in my own life, like even simple, like again, surface level, but people will talk about how corrupt the government is, and yet they'll still keep voting people in as if like, oh yeah, if we vote for that one, it'll change something somehow. Or you'll get people that'll know something is wrong, but just be so quick to justify it because they are so uncomfortable with what that's putting in their conscience. Like, they'll see something wrong. Like, I've noticed this about with people too. They will see something horrible happening to someone, and instead of being like, oh my god, that's horrible, we should probably do something about it so it doesn't happen to another person again, they'll immediately launch again into those justifications. I mean,
Yep.
of like, oh, well, it's not bad because they had to, because, under the
Because they
law
had to
they had,
feed their family.
yeah,
Yeah,
or
they had to feed
because
their kids.
the criminal has rights too, and we should not be mean to criminals because they're being criminals. I'm like, I've seen a lot of that, and I forget where I was going with this, but it's just people have largely given up. They've gotten lazy. They've given up. They've gotten
Yep.
like, what it kind of reminds me, like, our time in history reminds me a lot of that mouse utopia experiment. Are you
Oh, yes,
familiar with
yes.
that?
Yeah. Definitely am familiar with that.
It reminds me a lot of that because, mice, I mean, obviously we're not mice. We're not close to mice, but mice are also smart. Like, they're smart enough to know how to survive things. But the second that we were that they're given ways to escape their reality and get into pleasure, like I think in the mouse utopia, it was, they were given plenty of food and place to run around, and they were given this like stimulator thing that felt so good, and eventually they just gave up on interacting with each other at all. And then
Yep.
I feel like we're heading in that direction, but I also feel like we are heading more into the direction of blatant ignorance, and I'll kind of explain what I mean. Um, at one point, we kind of were given the illusion of choice, Democrat or Republican, this or that, and we were given kind of the illusion of free will, and we were also given the Potemkin village that is known as the internet. It looked like we could just find any information on anything we wanted to for a long time, right? That's how the internet was sold to us. So, but this whole time they've been pushing us into these little bubbles that just do nothing but validate what we say, what we already think, or if you're kind of like one of us, I think M10 was recently telling me that for for her, they were pushing her more into like right-wing content and stuff like that. So they kind of try and they've always tried to like push the herd into whatever bubbles make them the most controllable. But they've always given
Yep.
us this illusion of choice that we can go find something else. And over the past few years, the illusion that they've given us is being stripped away. The illusion of having free access to information, like unfettered access to information, that's all being stripped away. The illusion of choice between one thing or another, that's all being stripped away. And we're regressing back into like what's more similar to like the, feudalism, serfdom, whatever, like just all these different things where the common theme was that people were kept ignorant, and
Yep.
you can't get any unless you have tons of money to throw at it. For the most part, it's really hard to get, it seems to be harder to get like actual scientific data on things than it really should be. So they're restricting access to a lot of things now,
Yep.
and they're pushing us more and more into the dark. And we're going to get back we're kind of going back, we're regressing back into what humans used to be even before this whole technical era began. And I'm wondering if we're just going through a cycle, like another cycle, like maybe we've been here. Sometimes I wonder if we've just been here before, and there needs to be something that happens that change that to like push us out of ignorance again.
Sadly, um, I think enough force and enough pressure is going to have to be put on the human race to get people to snap out of it. because what people don't understand is force in and of itself is not bad. It's only once it becomes coercive force. Force is how we use to talk, force is how we use to, walk, force is how we use to create. So you can look at force as one of the universal forms of creation. But then sadly, you have friction, so you put friction on anything, you can create energy. That's why we have two hands. That's why we have 2 feet, because you can't create anything in reality without two things. You always need two things to create. You can never create with just one. So take your two hands and you rub them together, you have friction. Just as though you take, hell, your feet and you walk on the ground, you create friction. Well, that's why they always want you bond into the dialectics, hell, left versus right, hell, man versus woman, hell, Nike versus Reebok, Coke versus Pepsi, East Coast versus West Coast, because they're dialectics. They are dialectics put there in order to create friction. And that friction that is created is an internal friction, because that dialectic is really an internal dialectic, which creates that internal schism. And that's one of the second things that I wanted to bring up is people running away from their shadow work, people running away from their trauma. And I know you brought this up, earlier, but we are never going to get to a world based in freedom if people do not heal their trauma, if people do not do their shadow work. That is a requirement. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, because it's not, because people have some heavy, heavy trauma, but that trauma is begging. It is lashing out to be fixed. It is lashing out to be healed. So someone might say, what is trauma work? Because it's not very light in the so-called freedom, truth community. Your trauma work is when you go inside of yourself to heal your own problems, to maybe heal something that may have happened to you at a younger age, to heal something hell about yourself that you may not like, to heal something hell about yourself that may make you feel uncomfortable. Shadow work is all internal. It is about you going within your own self to challenge your beliefs, to challenge your worldview, to challenge how you feel and how you see yourself, to work with your ego, to work with that trauma, because the trauma is going to always be there. You're never really going to get rid of it. It's going to be there, but you have to accept that it happened to you, but understand it does not make up your whole being. And that's what people can't grasp, is they have this heavy baggage, this heavy burden that is holding them down. And that baggage is their trauma, because they don't want to be honest with themselves, and they want to keep denying. They want to keep her repression. How they want to keep burying it deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's only making that trauma worse and worse, because that is their inner darkness. That is the inner part of yourself that needs to be brought to the conscious mind. And that's what people don't want to do.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to some things, and that was kind of what in my introduction to this stream. Was kind of what I was talking about a little bit with the facing of demons. But one other thing that we can also learn when dealing with our traumas and our inner demons, like whatever you want to call it, could be trauma, could be addiction, whatever you're dealing with. That's why I said, demons, because we all have something. And for me, I've taken some of those, like I'm very much working on myself, and I'm also trying to take some of those really bad things and use them for good, because there are some things that but not ideal, but I've been able to learn from those things. I've been able to learn, like maybe you have something really horrible happen to you, and then you develop more compassion for people in situations that you would have previously kind of turned up your nose at, or whatever the
Yep.
situation may be. So everything that so I kind of live knowing that everything that crosses my path can be used as a lesson for myself. there are some things that you might not be able to see the lesson in as they're happening. And then you might look back 2, 3, 4 years later and be like, well, if this horrible thing didn't happen, I would have never learned this and I would have never gotten better at dealing with these situations when this person needed me to help them through it. Like, I don't know. I just always there's always something good that comes out of even the worst, ugliest things that cross your path if you're willing to look inside yourself and figure out what those good what how to use those things. Because of course there's always, evil or the devil or whatever that's going to try to get you to like keep regressing back into that traumatized self instead of actually looking at that trauma and being like, well, I can learn something from this. And now I know how to deal with this situation if it comes up again or if someone in my life is dealing with it now.
Yes, that would be a form of transmutation. You can take something bad that may have occurred to you, something that was negative, and you can use that as a means to transmute that energy into something that was positive. Now, mind you, if people are not familiar with what alchemy was, it was the occult teachings of taking something that was dark, like a base metal, which was ignorance, and turning that into gold. The base metal being lead, because lead is one of the heavy metals, is one of the symbolic representation of Saturn. Is what holds you down, it's what holds you back. And that's what our trauma does. So to turn that into a form of gold means you have to use pressure, you have to use willpower, you have to use courage, you have to use fortitude, because you have to constantly keep going. You have to constantly keep putting pressure on that lead, on your belief systems, on your trauma, on to yourself. And through time, through personal development, you can possibly come out a better for individual. And that was the symbolic representation of gold, the enlightened being. Well, if you look at the word enlighten, in light, and then also you are light. You are light on your feet. You're not weighed down. You're not weighed down by your trauma. You're not weighed down by that lead. And you're also not weighed down by those materialistic goods, those materialistic things that people want to stay attached to. They don't want to let go. They die rather than let go of these means of wealth, of this car, of this house, of this individual. Those are all things that were said to keep someone on the checkerboard floor in base consciousness in the form of lead, because those are things that hold us back. It's not saying that having those things are bad. It's once you become attached to those things and you don't want to let go, you want to constantly keep those things close to your heart. That's where we get the ignorance from. And then two, um, let's see. Oh, another reason why people should be going within themselves is because they think that evil is outside of them, which I'm not saying that it isn't. But one of the greatest things that Carl Jung said, he said, man is the oncoming of all the sources of evil because he does not know himself. If you do not think that evil lies within your own self, then you have a childlike way of thinking, because you will never ever walk that path of truth, walk that path of goodness until you have ventured into your own darkness. And I know people do not want to hear that. You have to walk into your own darkness and and fix your own problems and figure out how evil you are, and all of those thoughts and all of those feelings, all of those forms of repression, all of those forms of regression, all of those traumatic experiences, your persona, your mask. You have to come to understand that and admit to yourself, like, yes, you are capable of doing evil. Yes, you are capable of doing bad, wrong, immoral forms of action. And that's the problem. People think that they're just these little good, these little good beings who would never do anything wrong. That is again, a very childish way of thinking. We are capable of doing good. We are capable of doing wrong.
Yeah,
We are
and
actually programmable.
not to be that guy, but that's how you get oppressive regimes. That's how you got the Nazis. They all thought that
Yep.
they were doing some great good by cleansing undesirables from the population. Like if people believe if people believe that they are good people and that like, and I'm not saying that there aren't any such thing as good people, but I don't think that people who walk around calling themselves good people are ever as good as they think they are. Like a good, because there are plenty of good people, quote unquote, that went and followed orders and, like, locked their neighbors in cages and did whatever and still
Yep.
do to this day. Like, it's just that's why I'm always looking at my motivations for everything that I do, for how I carry myself, because I never ever want to end up harming somebody accidentally when I think I am doing good. Because it's not intentional harm when people just, it's not necessarily intentional harm, it's just that people can, if they're not careful and they don't know themselves, they can convince themselves that even the most evil action is for a greater good.
Right. So let's define what is good, because that's something that most people can't do. And if you cannot define the terms that you use, then sadly you could be manipulated by the words that you think that you know. So when we say that something is good, it is a representation of that is correct, because correct and good were synonymous with kill each other. So when we say something is correct, that would be synonymous with something that is true. So those three words pretty much can be interchangeable. So then we look at good in the form of behavior. If someone does something that is moral, that is good, that is right. All of those words are synonymous. They are all freaking interchangeable. But the key point is, why is it moral? Why is it good? Why is it right? It is right because the actions do not initiate violence or coercion. Now, I want people to really think about that. The actions do not initiate violence or coercion because no individual has a right to do violence, because violence, at its etymological standpoint, means to violate. Comes from the Latin word relare, because in Latin the V's were pronounced as W's. So to violate. So what are you violating? You are violating someone's rights. So the act of violence is always immorally wrong. It doesn't matter who perpetrates the violence. Violence is the initiation of coercive force, meaning you are taking action against someone's free will. Whenever there is a wrongdoing, free will has to be violated. Why does it have to be violated? Because free will is what was given to us by God, by the Creator. When we violate that, we violate God. We violate the Creator. To violate someone's free will, that is what evil is. Because evil is the destruction of freedom. It is destruction of rights. It is the destruction of what is good, the destruction of nature, the destruction of life, the destruction of free will. So when we talking about actions and behaviors, a good moral action is right because it does not initiate, meaning you are not the person starting in manifestation. And the key word is initiate, because if someone brings violence against you, you are not initiating. You have to respond to it. Then that's when you can use self defense to protect your bodily autonomy and your rights and freedom. So if you're on the street and a deadly politician pulls out this piece of paper and says, "Hey, I have a right to rob you. Give me all your money." And you pull out your firearm and you use self-defense because that politician didn't have a right to do that, then you are in the right because that politician is initiating violence. No one has a right to initiate violence. That's what people have to understand. Free will is important. It is so important to understand. Discernment, free will, the ability to choose. Whenever that is taken off the table, you are in the wrong. Now, some would say, well, you're taking that person's free will. No, once you commit a wrong, you forfeit your rights over. You forfeit your right of safety. You forfeit your right of not being harmed because you are initiating it into manifestation, not the person who's just walking down the street or hell, the person who's not doing anything. It is always the person who is starting, who is initiating, who is bringing it into the physical manifestation. They are the ones who are perpetrating violence because it is coercion. And coercion is when you violate someone's free will. You say, hey, if you don't give me this, then I'm going to do this. Hey, if you don't pay your taxes, I'm going to send I'm going to send the thugs to your house. If you don't pull over, I'm going to call my boys in blue and we're going to we're going to coerce you to pull over. And that's the thing is people are supporting coercion. People are supporting violence and they think that it's moral. They think that it's right because a piece of paper claims that it's right. But again, you cannot be the arbiter of right and wrong. No man, no woman in physical manifestation is the arbiter of right and wrong. Those are something that are ingrained into the cosmos. They are created by God. And that's what people have to understand. So that's what good is. It is correct. It is moral. It is true. And in behavior, it is correct and moral because it does not initiate violence. So most people will understand that. And they are not initiating violence. They really aren't. But they support mentally with their energy. They support a violent system by voting, by paying taxes, by sending their kids to these indoctrination camps. And that's the thing. That's where people fall victim to. It's because even though your actions may not support violence, you are supporting it mentally. You are supporting it emotionally. And
Yeah,
therefore,
voting is one example of saying that you consent to this. You consent to being ruled.
correct.
You you know, if you if you make, like, let's say another thing, like a politician makes a law or something, and then, instead of maybe fighting back, like, and trying to do something within your community, when you hear about this crazy law, you're just like, well, it's the law and the politician said so, so we just can't, don't protest it or whatever. Because people will just support anything that makes them not responsible anymore.
Yep.
And I think that was a good chunk of what happened in, like, the last 3 years. People were, and yeah, I know this is like a surface level example, but people were, as soon as the government gave orders that told people they could basically bully each other and they should bully each other, suddenly all those people that were, you might have thought were just decent neighbors, suddenly they were pushing and advocating things that you could never imagine. It's all because when it became legal in their eyes, it became moral.
Right.
They were not only consenting to it, but they were expecting you to consent to it. And what those people don't realize is when they take rights away from somebody else, they're also taking their own rights away from themselves.
Yes, that is correct. And then two, you look at the internal contradiction that happens here is because they're not physically doing violence, but they're mentally and emotionally supporting violence. So that right there is going to create an internal schism because your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions are not in sync. And what is the number when you have two-thirds? It's always 666 repeating. Always. So whenever you have two out of the three out of sync are in sync and one of them is not, that's what man is in base consciousness. That's the satanic man, man in ignorance, because he is unconsciously creating. In order to have full integrity, integrated being, your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions have to be in sync. You cannot be in any form of duality. You cannot be in any form of internal contradiction because whenever you have two out of the three, you always have 666 repeating. And in the occult schools, there was always man in base consciousness. And the reason for that is because 666 held repeating. You take the three sixes, you use held gematria, you get held 18. You add the one and the eight, you get nine. And in the dark forms of occult schools, the nine was always the number of the ego. Because if you add ego to more situation, you just get more ego. And if you multiply ego with more ego, you get more ego. And even in math, the number nine is tricky because if you add nine with pretty much one throughout of the nine held numbers, like held nine plus two, you get held 11. You add one and one, you get two. So pretty much you add more ego, you get more ego. And you can do that with all of the numbers through one through nine, and then also with multiplication. If you do 9 times 5, you get 45. 4 and 5 added up equals 9. You do 9 times 9, you get 81. Well, 8 and 1 added up equals 9. So just some kind of occult gematria right there. And I think that works with any number that you multiply with 9 from what I understand. But as long as man is in this unconscious form of his own ego, then that's where we fall into hedonism. That's where we fall into control. That's where we fall into lower level forms of consciousness. Now, mind you, there is a healthy aspect of our ego because you can never really get rid of it because the ego is the part of you that puts food into your mouth. The ego is the part of you that clothes yourself, that separates yourself from other people. Your ego is the I, it is the individual part of you. And you can say it is the masculine part of you because one of the masculine traits is being a individual. So a lot of new age, garbage rhetoric, because I'm not a fan of new age false spirituality, they'll say we need to get rid or kill the ego. That's a part of yourself. That's a part of you that you need to live. How about you work with your ego and learn to balance it and work with it and develop a healthy sense of your ego to where you are not being ran by your ego, but you are in control of the ego. And that's what people don't want to do. And we see this in society. We see all these people who are just very egoic, the whole selfish culture, the whole me culture. Hey, it's all about me. Hey, take my picture. Hey, go on Instagram. It's all about me. Well, egoism is one of the main tenets of the satanic ideology, if people aren't familiar with that. And that's why I can honestly say we live in a satanic world. And I don't mean like satanic as like the Christian form. I mean as in a form of mentality in the way you see the world, because a real Satanist sees themselves as God. A real Satanist will say, hey, it's all about me. I am the arbiter of right and wrong. A real Satanist buys into social Darwinism. A real Satanist buys into eugenics. And sadly, that's most people. So you have the four tenets of the satanic hell mindset, which sadly 99% of the people subscribe to. You have egoism, you have moral relativism, you have social Darwinism, and then you have hell eugenics. Pretty much like the whole God complex right there. And that's most people, sadly. And that's exactly the mindset that they want you in, because they feed you like small doses of it to create like a smaller form of it. Then therefore you create more chaos and more control. Then people fall into the dialectic and they say, well, because this happened, we have to create more man-made laws. And then the more man-made laws that are constructed, that creates more of a restriction to where you can't breathe. It starts to suffocate your freedom. Then you start to build a prison because you're fighting with each other, because you're in divide and conquer. You're divided internally and you're being conquered externally. Then therefore the real social engineers, the ones who are creating all of this, can say, hey, here is the solution. Of course, there's going to always be more control. And because we're so busy fighting with each other, like over things that don't make sense, fighting over, you know, you don't hell worship my God, or you didn't vote for my hell, you didn't vote for my person, or because your what your dad said something hell about my dad, hell, let's fight. Like all of this trivial, stupid mind control shit that's so irrelevant, that just keeps us all divided, rather than coming together to understand who the real enemy is. And the real enemy lies right in the mirror. It, the real enemy lies right in the mirror. People want to point fingers at Bill Gates. People want to point fingers at the Freemasons. People want to point fingers at all of these politicians. No, it's you. It's you. It's you. Because you continue to subscribe to this nonsense. You
Yeah,
continue to
we kept
hand
giving
your
them.
power over.
Yeah, we kept giving them power. We didn't like. I mean, as a collective, we weren't like really doing much about it. I mean, sure, we complained, but I mean, sometimes. And then you got the people that are like walking around thinking those people are great, but those people are really a manifestation of what happens when people don't learn how to govern themselves as well as they should. I mean, sure, we're always going to need checks and balances because nobody is perfect, but those checks and balances don't necessarily have to be handing your power to other people. And I don't know, and I don't claim to have the answer on this. I think that if we were actually going to make the change, it's going to have to be a gradual change because we didn't get here overnight. We got here gradually. We got here through a very gradual programming. You know, the we didn't wake up one day in 1984. We just kept falling into all these dialectics and we kept picking fights with each other and we kept falling for all these manufactured problems and getting mad at the boogeyman and then you know clamoring for solutions. It's just we keep living in these cycles, and as long as we're not on an individual level trying to break these cycles, they're just going to keep manifesting themselves on a collective level. Doesn't matter how many times you see the same thing. If you keep kind of living the definition of insanity and doing the same things and expecting a different result, then you're not going to get a different result.
Right.
That's
People think
another
that.
thing. I'm sorry. I was going to say that's another thing that I think is really hard for people to swallow. You know, I've had people show up here and be like, "What are the solutions? What are the solutions? What do we do? What do we do?" And like, I don't know. I'm not singling anybody out, but I've run into that here and there over the years. And the truth is, a lot of people I think are looking for kind of a one and done solution. overthrow the government or do this or do that or go protest or what have you. And the truth is, like, they're looking for that the fast solution when we're not at a point where we can have a quick solution because the problem didn't manifest quickly. You know, these things change takes time, it takes patience, it takes work, and it takes pain. And these are
Right.
all things that we tend to stray away from and we try to escape from. And that's one of the reasons we have so many distractions in our society. Even not even just the media, but like, if you're starting to feel a little too many feelings, you can go, play video games or distract yourself from it or go get antidepressants. Like there's a million ways that people can go about avoiding their they're feeling the little voice in their head that tells them, "Hey, there's something wrong here and we need to change." Uh,
Oh, good points. Good points. Yeah. Um, and I 100% agree with you. There's not going to be a quick, easy fix to this because even if we somehow, you know, man together and took out all of the ones who are doing this, like the ones who are at the top, the only thing that would happen is people would just replace those ones in authority with a new form of authority
and
because
look at history too, because
yeah,
every time we do that, we replace it with something worse.
right.
But
They don't get
now
to the
we're
root.
so now we're s- plus now with like the internet and all the technology and stuff, we are so programmed into basically instant gratification that we just now we want quick solutions for everything. And just one more thing that I wanted to bring up, and I'm sorry for keeping interrupting you, but one of the other things I want to bring up is something I thought about a couple years ago that kind of made its way back into my mind recently. The the superhero movies. What's the basic idea? Like why do we have so many superhero movies? I think we have them because in those movies, like this is kind of they're kind of a good illustration of what people expect in our collective reality. They expect someone else to swoop in and save them. In our reality, we saw it with, the election of Trump. So many people were relying on Trump to be this hero to save them from losing all their freedoms and this and that, and it just didn't happen. But we have all this superhero programming because the whole crux of the superhero movie is not to be the hero yourself, not to look at ways to help people around you, but it kind of, I think, implants this like subconscious thing where it's like, "Oh, we just need a hero, someone big and strong to come save us from our terrible reality." Because if you look at like superhero movies, the majority of the people are helpless. The cops don't do anything. Everyone just relies on, I don't know, Spider-Man to come save them.
Right. The whole savior complex, which has been around since the dawn of man. And that's the problem with people is they want someone else to be responsible and to fix their problems. Rather, you growing up, you psychologically, spiritually, mentally, in whatever form that you need to do, and grow up and be your own savior. How when people say, "What can I do?" It's like that sounds so weak. You're not a victim here. Like no strong man or strong woman will ask that because they understand, like, hey, I'm going to be the solution. If not, then I'm going to start creating solutions you know, in my own area that's going to empower me that maybe I can create some change. People have a defeatist mentality, but then it comes down to people also have a broken mentality. Their will has been broken. Just as though you can break a animal, how you can keep it captive, you can keep it locked up, you can give it a terrible diet, control its environment, You can take it away from its loved ones, and you can use trauma and fear. And over time, you may can control a lion because you've broken its will. You may can control a elephant because you've broken its will. These are all techniques of torture. These are all techniques that they've used on prisoners, and they break their will. You deprive them of sleep. You deprive them of true information. You deprive them of true touch. You deprive them of true communication with others. That's how you start to break down a person's will. And sadly, that's what has happened to people to where, they'll feel as though, well, what can we do? We're powerless. No, you have all the power. You just have to know it. You have to know it in your mind, not believe it. You have to know it, because until you know it, you're never going to act on it. And that's the thing, is people don't understand how reality works, also, because the mind is the generator of all things. It's been said that we live in God's mind. It's been said that the cosmos is the mind of God, and we are all just fragments, of that, and we manifest it through our mind. It's projected through our mind, and thoughts are what create held emotions, and emotions are what lead to actions. So if we started to change our thoughts, then there's no way we're going to change our behaviors. So then it all comes down to, how do we change our thoughts? Well, you have to take in right information, because information and knowledge is food for the mind. So someone who feels powerless, then you need to empower yourself by taking in the right, correct knowledge and the right, correct, you know, information, because right information will lead to right results, and right knowledge will lead to right behavior and right action.
Not only
So,
that, but consider your environment too, because sometimes when you're feeling helpless, in your microcosm, I'm not saying this works for like the macrocosm, but you can't do anything with the world around you until you're looking at your own environment. Like you have to always be looking like, okay, how do I clean up my little corner of the world? Do I have to leave if like I'm miserable doing this? I'm miserable here. Do I have to, you know, I don't know, be somewhere else? Do I have to like maybe clean this whole mess out, get rid of the clutter? Like, it's just people have to be looking at people have to be looking at themselves and what's around them. Actually, another thing that I tend to do when I know I'm not in a good place is I look at my environment, because if my environment is cluttered, it it be like if you look at your environment closely enough, it's often a manifestation of what's going on in your mind. So if your environment's cluttered, then you need to figure out what's going on in your mind, because that's probably cluttered with a bunch of useless information the same way your um space might be. I mean, not that there's much that's considered useless information, but you know what I mean, like useless thoughts, like thoughts that are negative, thoughts that are, holding you back instead of lifting you up. We always have to we always have to be looking at, you know, are our thoughts our own, or are they things we're getting from the environment around us?
yep.
Like for example, when we live when I don't know, if I turned on the news or whatever and I listened for an hour to like how scary everything is, and oh, Americans, everything's just so out of control, and they're all screwed and they're all struggling, and I'm like, it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. The only reason it is this way is because we keep listening to this information and we keep accepting it as, oh well, this is our reality and we have to accept that we're just going to be screwed, instead of taking our power back in our own lives. We can't control every problem that happens in our lives. Things are put into our life for a reason, oftentimes, but what we can do is we can control our reactions, we can control or our responses. We can control what we do, and we can do whatever we can, and we can do whatever we can to prevent, like, the realistic worst case scenarios, instead of looking at, like, oh, something bad's gonna happen and we're all screwed. I feel like a lot
Yep.
of people have taken this attitude with Agenda 21. They just they just kind of accept, oh, Agenda 21 is coming. Then there's nothing. We're just gonna accept that our whole lives are just gonna be hell now. Nothing we can do about that. And I beg to differ. Yeah, we can't just, like I said, we're not gonna just be able to throw off all the shackles entirely, but right away. But if we don't accept that as our future, if we don't accept everything that's in those documents and in those World Economic Forum talks as our future now, it does not have to be, even if it is for a time and we have to struggle our way out of it. It does not have to be our lives for the rest of our lives.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. It will only end up that way if we continue to do nothing. We continue to, to have our heads in the sand, and we continue to stay in this means of ignorance, in this means of moral relativistic thinking, in this means of solipsistic thinking, and if we continue to ignore our inner journey. And then another thing that I wanted to bring up is people really have to figure out who they serve, because too many people are trying to serve two masters. Most people would say that they believe in some deity or some form of divine, higher power, and then they go down and then they deep throat the state. You can't serve two masters here. You can't even serve the God of creation and worship money. You have to figure out what side you are really on. And too many people are still trying to serve two masters. And that right there in and of itself creates an internal schism, because you got one side that's going to one master, you have the other side going to the second master. Again, there's no balance, there's no
Yeah, you
harmony.
can't speak out of both sides of your mouth. Then I
Right.
think that's what those there's a lot of Bible verses about that. And yeah, I'm using the Bible because, you know, it's
Yeah.
just it's a very the Bible is a very kind of, at least in America, it's a very universal thing. Like, everybody, just about everybody here has touched a Bible at some point, has heard some parables, has done all of those things. So I'm using the Bible very deliberately with that. Plus there's a lot of good advice in the Bible. There's a lot of
Yes.
good words, very powerful. It's the word of God, you know.
Like the golden rule, that people
Yeah.
forget about,
But
by thy fruits you shall know them. How people forget about
yeah.
that verse.
But the
Hell,
thing is, we have so many people that do speak out both sides of their mouths. And there's so much cognitive dissonance. It's like that, and that's brought up so much in the Bible, is because that's been that's as old as time. The schism between the two masters that people serve, between their persona and their shadow self. There's always a schism in most people that they have to find a way to mend, and most people don't try to mend that division within themselves. So they
right.
instead they end up, and this is why, as I think in my last stream I was talking about, like, how every discussion, especially with politics, every discussion turns into childish bickering. No, you, no, you. Because so many of those people that are doing that bickering can't look within themselves and can't, like, mend their own broken pieces. So it's so instead of, like, actually understanding where other people are coming from, everybody just throws insults and bickers like children.
Yep. And then too, you know, how the word politics, poly in Greek meaning many, and ticks being a parasite. So you just have many parasites who are, you know, bloodthirsty, who are feeding off of us. Because that's really what politicians are. You know, because just
Yeah,
parasites who feed off of us.
they feed off of us physically with our tax money, they feed off of us spiritually. With because obviously to sit down and listen to, I don't know, Joe Biden or whoever, that's that's energy, that's physical and mental energy that people are putting into listening to this dude that does nothing, or not just any politician. They'll do nothing. They don't ever say anything profound or helpful, but they only serve to sow division and to take
Yeah.
more from everyone. But people find themselves somehow looking for the lesser of two evil, not really ever thinking about the fact that the lesser of two evils is still evil and we shouldn't be
Yep.
consenting to evil.
Right. We have to resist evil with all of our being, you know, not just with our voices, but with our hands, you know, with our minds. You know, we have to be the Christ. We have to do what Christ talked about in the story, you know, in the Bible. You know, he did not bow down to the Roman Empire, to the Pharisees and Sadducees, you know, to the Caesar. You know, even when he was threatened, he kept doing what he knew he was supposed to do. And we have to have that same mentality. We have to have that same willpower. But sadly, so many people, you know, will sell out. So many people will fall victim to those alluring, those forms of attractiveness. You know, we talked about infantil infantilization, you know, and how people with a childlike mentality, they like the shiny things. They like to be railed in. They want that alluring thing. What is allure? Allure is something that you use to catch something with, and you reel them in. You know, it's almost like a form of enchanting because when you say the word enchant, it linguistically sounds like the word entrance. And that's why whenever you go to a store, it has all of those shiny bells and whistles. It has all the music playing, you know. So when you walk in, it creates this calming emotional vibe, and they'll greet you because they want you to walk through that entrance. So once you enter that entrance, they can entrance you and put you in a trance and sell you something that you don't really need. It's all forms of sorcery, folks. I hate to tell you that. It's all sorcery.
That's
But only
all.
those who do not know themselves will fall victim to that.
I always like the saying, a man who stands for nothing will fall for anything. And yeah, about the mind control. I mean, that's really all mind control is, right? It's just finding those weaknesses in someone's psychological, spiritual, even physical sometimes understanding of themselves.
Yeah.
Like look at what they do to the women with like makeup and stuff. They
I'm
get
glad you
people
brought that up.
they get they get they get women to believe that there's something, like, I don't know. Obviously I don't, I know women who wear makeup. Like, obviously I don't know this from the inside, right? But, like, I know a lot of women who wear makeup. My I know people who are women who are very attractive, but they'll spend hours a day putting on this makeup because there's like a commercial that comes on TV or something on social media that pops up. And it's like, ah, the person has like one zit and they're super fixated on it and they gotta, get it to where they can hide the zit and it's just a zit, or they want to make themselves look super super good for social media, or there's just this one little piece of their face of something on themselves that they don't like, and those commercials know how to use those the right words, where they they'll they'll take like some insecurity, right? They'll get people thinking about their insecurity and then they'll end the commercial with the because you're worth it. And then people that don't think they're worth anything are going to go and buy that thing that makes them feel better about whatever they're insecure about, because I think it'll make it less noticeable for everybody. But in reality, nobody really gives a crap if you've got a zit or if your shirt's a little bit wrinkled or whatever, because
Right.
everybody else is worried about what's going on in their own life. No one cares if you have a stain on your shirt.
Yeah, it's funny how that you brought that up because that's one thing that's always been on my mind because just even the word makeup is something that's not real. So you're putting something that is not real on your beautiful, your natural face. And mind you, you know, what a woman puts onto her body is her own right. I'm not telling, her women, her what to do, but it's just the whole idea of you just taking some form of mascara, some mask, and putting it on your face to make up something. It just doesn't sit well with me, and because we've seen all the videos of the people, who put on all of this, makeup and they pretend to be someone else. And it can be a form of art, because her makeup, it actually goes back into, I wanna say, like, the Asian traditions when they would, help perform help on stage, and they would put on the makeup to pretty much get into character, because you was portraying almost like a mask sort, and when you would portray this mask or this character, then you would invoke pretty much a different personality, so you had to get into character and paint your face in order to perform. Well, now it's just become a form of egoism, you know, because a lot of, females think that they're just not beautiful in their own her natural right. And they suffer a lot of internal, you know, trauma or, internal inadequacies that they go outside of themselves to feel more beautiful. And I find that to be a problem because you see it, now being pushed upon, her little girls. And it's like you don't need all that external validation from anybody. As long as you know that you yourself are beautiful, because that beauty should come from an internal beauty, not an external beauty. So it's like they're doing it backwards, you know, and then they are trying to portray themselves as something that they are actually not.
Yeah, exactly. Because you know what? You could put as much on you could have the nicest makeup, the nicest clothes, whatever. And I've seen some women that I've found very attractive, and then immediately you just no matter how, and this goes for men and women, so I am not singling out women. I'm sorry, women. Um I'm not singling out women, but my point is that somebody could look nice on the inside, but the second I see like an attitude out of this person, they're just as ugly as the ugliest person, if not more ugly. If there's an ugly, quote unquote ugly person with a really kind personality, I'm not going to see their physical ugliness, but if there's a really pretty person with a horrible personality, I'm going to see theirs right away. I'm not even going to pay any mind to what's on the outside.
Yep. I totally understand that because, the outside beauty is something that people focus on, but it is the inner beauty. Like that's where the real strength lies. It is have your attributes, your character, like how you behave, like you have your self-confidence. That's really is what's going to be the most attractive part, hell about you, not the physical, for not just how you look. All that is just low level forms of conscious thinking. And
Yeah.
sadly, that's where most people are still stuck in. So the whole point of this conversation is we have to raise our consciousness. We cannot leave consciousness at the door. We really have to understand that consciousness is the ability to discern. It is pattern recognition. It is becoming more aware of ourselves. And then also to the objective realm, the environment that we all share, that we are all creating. And as long as we forget that consciousness, then we will always revert back down to our lower level forms of animalistic stimulus response, hedonistic forms of our own self.
Yeah, we'll always regress if we're not always trying to get to improve. I've definitely noticed what you're talking about just to get on the consciousness thing. I have noticed what you're talking about because I can kind of see the difference. Like I think I've talked in a few streams, like I always call it like surface level thinking. Like people that just don't see anything beyond what is directly in front of their face. They stay on that base consciousness that's very very surface level. They don't they don't look down at the water, they just swim or tread water.
Yeah. And I would like to say something else that I know is not very favorable because this study usually gets demonized. And you have to understand it is when you let someone else decide how you are going to think, that is a form of mind control. The reason why a lot of people stay surface level is because they think that occult knowledge is evil. They think that occult knowledge is bad. And I'm not saying that there are certain schools of occultism that can lead someone into darkness, because that is absolutely 100% true. But what I'm saying is knowledge in and of itself is not good, it's not bad. It is a tool. It is a tool that can be used by the wielder, by the individual. So as long as we continue to think that occult knowledge is bad and the mystery schools are bad, then we will stay ignorant of how we are being manipulated. Because all it really is ancient psychology and how the objective laws of nature work. That's all that it is. And it is information that can be very empowering, and it is also information that can be misused and hell abuse. It all comes down to your will. That's all that it comes down to is who you are as a individual. If you have evil intent, you will use any tool as a form of wrongdoing, as a form of coercion, as a form of violence, as a form of black magic and sorcery. But if your intention and your willpower is true, it is pure and it is good, then you can also use those same tools as a means of mind influence and as a means to spread this hell knowledge. Because without this occult knowledge, our species is done. It's
Yeah,
literally
because
done.
we'll never because we can't know our enemies, and I think that
Right.
that's a very important thing to bring up because I grew up with a lot of very religious people, and I use the word and I tend to make a distinction between religious and spiritual. So I'm not saying this about all Christians at all, but I will say that when I to define the word religious as I use it, I would say it's people that follow all these rigid rules for the sake of following the rules because they're afraid of the consequences of not following the rules, but not necessarily eager to get the understanding of why those rules are there in the first place. See what I mean?
Yes.
So I grew up with people that were like that and that were Christian, and they always tried to steer me away from ever learning about the occult or anything different from what I believed. But when I got a little older, I started to do that because when we don't know when we don't know what we're up against, we risk having a lot of wrong information. And even worse, we risk making caricatures of those people when we actually go to talk to them and we wake them up. This could be people who believe in the occult, it could be people who are stuck in the matrix in some way. If we don't try to understand where people on the opposite side of the spectrum are, then we will never know how to defeat whatever mind control they're under. That, and as people, another important thing to consider is some is that if you get to a point where you believe that you cannot be manipulated, you are the most ripe for manipulation. So even if you are 100% sure that something someone is saying is absolutely 100% wrong, you should still listen because you might be able to learn something even if it's just about where they might be coming from. And I think that's one of the reasons that they are trying to remove empathy from our species. Because what is empathy but the ability to put ourselves in someone else's shoes? So when we're fighting against you know, evil things, whether that be like occult, whether it be just standard matrix stuff, when we're dealing with stuff like that, we have to be able to kind of backtrack and see where the people with that belief system might be coming from so that we know exactly how to rebut it. Because no one just starts believing in um, subjective morality just out of the blue one day. It's a very everything is a gradual process. And if we don't
Yeah.
understand where they started, where they've been and where they're going, then we're never going to understand where they're at and how to help them off of the path to destruction.
Yeah.
And I've always heard the saying, the people that don't want you to think are not your friends, and that is the truth. If you have someone who is telling you not to think about something, it's because they haven't quite explored their belief system well enough for it to be able to stand scrutiny. And they know deep down inside they might be wrong about some things.
Right. And
They're just not ready to hear it or face it.
here, one last point is I would like to define what the occult means from
Occult
its
just
etymology.
means occult just means hidden. It's just not.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. That's all that it means. It's not something, scary, that you read, like online. It's not anything devilish. It's not anything, how chaotic. It's like the word just simply means hidden. It comes from the Latin word occultus or occultare, which was referring to hitting from the eye. So if you put your phone inside of your pocket, it is occulted because it is hiding from everyone else. So we need to kind of go into this new form of where we bring this occulted information back into the light, back into consciousness. And that's the problem is because not only has information been occulted, but our trauma has been occulted deep in our unconscious. It's not just bringing this information to light. It's about bringing all of the aspects of our being and how the laws of nature work, how this physical reality works. We have to bring it all to the light because if we don't, we are never ever going to have the right tools to fight this war. And that's why you see so many people, sitting on the sideline and they're just watching, how just watching. They're stuck in stagnation, how stuck on, how whatever is happening on the mainstream media. Like you have all these truthers who are just putting out videos on what's happening in the world. That's exactly where they want you because you're not really focused on the mental flame. You're not focused on causality. You're not focused on the root of the problem. You're focused on something that has already happened. And that's where no change can occur, because you cannot change something that has already happened.
Yeah,
And that's exactly,
it's basically like playing. It's basically like chasing a mouse instead of setting a trap for it. Like you could chase
yep,
a mouse outside. Like you could chase your mouse. You could go full Tom and Jerry and chase a mouse all around your house all day long. Are you gonna catch it? No, because those fuckers are fast and they can just hop into a hole in the wall. But
yep,
if you set some traps and you try to understand, like, okay, why am I getting a mouse in the house? Is my house not clean? Are they getting in through the back door? Could I get rid of them with this trap? Like instead of chasing the mice around your house, why not consider why there's mice in your house in the first place, and why not think of a more well formulated way of getting rid of them? Whereas, like,
yep.
so that's what truthers are doing right now. They're just kind of, and that's one of the reasons did not I did not really make a lot of videos for a while, was because I felt like all I was doing was chasing the mouse, and it just, every time I would post a video, I just felt like it wasn't right. I felt like, okay, everybody keeps telling me I'm supposed to do this because I'm awake, but what does that actually mean? Like how does posting the 512th video on something that goes pew pew really going to help anything if I can't make a bigger point with it? If I can't, if, like, why am I chasing this mouse when I know I can set a trap for it and then go look around my house for holes in the wall or whatever else they might be getting in through.
Right. He'll learn how to use the problem solving steps to actually solve the problem. The why is this occurring? How can I stop this from happening? When did it start happening? And then you start to formulate, you start to create ideas on how you can stop this from happening. And then two, another thing with people, especially in the so-called truth and freedom, movement, is their imagination has been murdered. They don't know how to imagine things. They can't imagine a world different than what it is now. The death of the imagination is prevalent. It like it is so prevalent in most people, and they'll say, "Well, I can't see a world based in exactly what we're talking about." It's like, well, why can't you? You have an imagination, don't you? Yes, they do. But you see, there's such a thing as brain atrophy, and it is real, and it's come through a lot of chemical, warfare, a lot of frequency warfare, to where I would actually say that people's brains are actually broken, straight atrophy, to the point to where they're not operating. Hell, the neural pathways are not firing, the brain synapses are not firing as correctly. There's a total imbalance within the right and left hemispheres. The corpus callosum, which is the little filaments, the little ligaments that connect the left and right hemisphere, and it's supposed to be there to help transport information and for communication. Yeah, I would say that people have brain atrophy, to where their brains are either shrinking, or they have holes in them, or just something in the neocortex is not operating right. And that's why they can't imagine these things. Hell, that's why they can't properly think. That's why they can't properly discern, information. So we are under a lot of, not just war, but have psychological war and frequency war. How these frequencies that we are being bombarded with have an effect on the electromagnetic, chemical, um, um, bodily sphere. You know, and then therefore, if we are being hit with these frequencies, we are walking around as a form of toxicity, as a form of imbalance that has an effect on our mental plane. And that's something too that a lot of people don't really want to go into because, like I say, people want to just stay on the surface level, stay in the realm of conspiracy. And I can tell you that like conspiracy is only like 1% of it. There's so much more, like there's so much more in the realm of consciousness.
That is very true. And I apologize, but I do have to get going. It's
Yeah,
been
it's all
it's
good.
been really great to have you on here, because
Yes,
I think we
yes,
kind of talked about all those little ignored topics around here. And yeah, hopefully you can hop on some other time as well. I'll
yes.
see you around, Brandon.
All right. Appreciate you having me on, Hales.
No problem.
All right. Peace
Hey,
out.
wait a minute. Could you post me a link to your channel in the private chat real quick before you go? Cause
Sure.
I think you lost the channel and then I lost track of you. So I'm gonna
Yeah,
probably
hell, I've
post
lost
that on
2
the
channels.
yeah. So just post a link to your channel and I'll pop it in the description for you. Or just hit me
All
with it on
right.
Discord. I meant to ask and I didn't want to forget. Anyway, have a good night, dude. Great talking to you.
Yep, same here.
Bye.